Every DM has experienced this. You spend 6 hours planning out your session. You have planned out every detail of how your NPCs are going to respond to the players. You've hand-drawn every single map the players are going to use. You have multiple plot twists ready for this session. 40 minutes into the night, one of your players looks at you, and with the most sincere expression you've ever seen, they ask you what their crossbow does. And maybe you would want to take the time to explain its range and the damage and how you have to roll an attack roll first and then you roll damage if the attack roll is successful. But this is the 4th session in a row they've asked that question. So here is the question that we're going to pose today. Are people too lazy for Dungeons & Dragons? Hey everyone, this is Nat Nunn. My name is Napoleon and I'm here to help us stop rolling Nat 1s above the table. Now, I'm not here to answer definitively whether or not people are too lazy, but rather explore it in a way that does justice to maybe both sides of this issue. Now, I have strong opinions about it, and I suspect that maybe other DMs watching this do too, but I'm curious what your thoughts are below in the comments. I also would much rather take this apart and look at it from multiple angles than take like a really strong stance and just argue that. So what kicked all of this off for me was I was scrolling on Facebook and I came across this post. I've been playing and DMing since around 2000. I grew up with 3.5, Pathfinder, Rifts, Palladium, and all the wonderful crunchy systems where reading the rulebook was simply part of the hobby. My old groups were all experienced players, so everyone came to the table with a pretty solid understanding of the mechanics. Lately, I've been introducing a lot of newer players to 5.5e, and I'm running into something I don't really know how to navigate. It feels like many new players don't want to read the rules at all. They want to learn entirely by playing, ask how everything works every session, or expect someone else to explain every feature on their character sheet. And I'm not talking about obscure rules. I'm talking about questions like, what does a feat do? What's concentration? Can I hide in the middle of an open battlefield because cunning action lets me hide as a bonus action? How many spell slots do I have? What's my crossbow range? I'm happy to answer those questions the first time. I actually enjoy teaching new players. We were all new once. What I'm struggling with is feeling like players need to meet the DM halfway. If I'm spending several hours every week prepping maps, NPCs, encounters, and a story, is it unreasonable to ask players to spend 20 or 30 minutes reading the rules for their class, or looking up how their own abilities work? Has the expectation become that the DM teaches every mechanic instead of the players learning some of it themselves? Or am I simply looking at this through the lens of someone who learned RPGs in a different era? I'm not trying to gatekeep. I genuinely want to understand if this is the new normal and how other DMs handle it without feeling like they're running both the game and everyone's character. Veteran DMs, newer players, I'd honestly love your perspective. So we have this DM who's been running the game since the year 2000. And like him, honestly, I grew up on a lot of those crunchy systems. 3.5 edition and Pathfinder 1st edition are still my most played RPGs. Reading the rules was required to play those systems. You had to have an in-depth understanding of the mechanics of your character in order to make sure that the sessions didn't take 4 times the length of time that they required everyone else. And I can definitely see where some of his frustration comes from, where a lot of the questions that his players are asking are things that they should honestly have known. I also want to commend the OP here because he didn't come at this from a competitive angle where he wanted to blame the players and call them dumb, but he seemed to genuinely be asking if he's out of touch or if maybe this is the new normal. And I think because he had that honesty and that curiosity, we should maybe explore the issue from some other perspectives too. So I took the comments to see what the totally reasonable and normal reactions of people were. Let's see what they had to say. Go check the literacy rates. Half the problem is lazy people who like the idea or cultural aspect of D&D. The other half literally can't read. I found that younger, newer players require a lot more guidance. We learned by being info dumped and reading swaths of text, and they learn in more bite-sized chunks with a lot of hand-holding. Newer DM here, as some others have pointed out, it's accessibility, but also marketing. Many don't understand exactly what they need to do to get proficient at playing, such as reading the PHP, etc. I've had success communicating with my players and setting the expectation that at the least, I expect you to know your character better than I do. This guy I give wrong answers. What's the range of my X? 10 feet. Wait, it says right here it's actually Y. Oh, then it's Y. I've noticed just from being in the military for the last 18 years and having kids in their teens now, They don't learn the same way. They don't seek information the same way. And they want to learn the fastest way possible. Also, AI has rotted their brains. Half the kids in schools are on laptops all day searching everything on Google or AI. It's nonsense and it's changed the way they learn, for the worse. I concur. I want people to try it. I want them to feel success in learning. Privately, however, it is very frustrating to see even larger contingents of people who say they want to play D&D, but balk at reading even the class fully. There is discourse on threads about classes being too complicated and confusing to learn, or feats too complicated, which I'll grant you in Pathfinder 1st Edition, they're overwhelming, but Core 5e? Nah. I'm glad when people want to play, but I feel like the expectations of a DM and the fantasies of what D&D should look like are not always being backed up by according efforts from players. All right, so the replies were on a whole spectrum, and maybe we'll dive into a few of those just quickly, since I think that they cover different angles of this argument. You know, one guy said flatly that attention spans are shot. He seemed to hold that nobody wants to read anymore, and he feels badly for being the, no, you can't do that guy at his table. You know, we had the one guy getting a little adversarial there where he said that he gives players the wrong answers and forces them to look it up themselves. Yeah, maybe there's a decent trick to that in teaching, but I don't know if being combative with your players is necessarily the right environment. There were some genuine comments that were trying to link it between a generational gap, and I think that deserves its own conversation, particularly regarding the whole AI situation. And in fact, I think one of my upcoming videos is going to be specifically about AI in Dungeons & Dragons. What took me by surprise was that one person actually pushed back and was the opposite of doom and gloom there. And they pointed out that it probably does tie into more how the school system or how modern games now teach people. And to their point, they're saying that the players aren't unwilling, they're just untrained. And that proper communication with the players might actually be the solution that we're looking for. Now, I've had my own experiences with this. Years ago, when I was running a Pathfinder 1st Edition, I had a player who is dead set on playing a druid. Now, anyone who's familiar with how Pathfinder 1e does druids, they know that it's pretty complex. They know that wild shape is probably a lot more simple than 3.5 made it, but it still has a couple of nuances and rules that you need to know. This player just completely refused to learn how wild shape works. And as a result, she never actually ended up using wild shape. So it's like a core feature of her class never ended up getting used just because she didn't want to dive into the rules a little bit. And that was a little bit frustrating because we had this entire year-long campaign and it felt like a core piece of her character identity just sat on the sidelines. And I don't know if I regret that or if she would have changed that because the campaign was still incredible and she had a great time playing. But I do wonder if maybe there were certain situations that would have been more fun if she knew how that mechanic worked. I also tend to notice that this sort of shock approaching the rules tends to strike new players who don't understand what actually goes into playing a tabletop role-playing game. I don't think that the systems are being unfair by asking more of us, but rather potentially the communication that we're giving to these newer players when we're inviting them to play needs to change, and we need to preface it by telling them that they need to do some reading. Now let's look at maybe another side of this perspective. I don't think that most people are intentionally disengaged. There are a lot of other things that could be taking place, like ADHD, dyslexia, vision impairment, processing issues, and any myriad of other things that might make processing a giant block of text in a rulebook either not the most accessible thing or quite difficult. I don't personally have experience with games running for players that face these different challenges, but I'm aware that there are different tools to help players in these circumstances. For example, I know people who use voice-to-text features to turn long passages in the rulebook into something a bit more manageable. I also want to give a bit of credit to the newer editions of the game. They're a lot more accessible than previous editions have been. They've simplified a lot of different rule sets and made the math a lot less complicated. You know, there's also cleaner formatting, more concise language, more consistency across different rule books. So there are a lot of situations that used to take pages upon pages of rules to clarify that now just take maybe a few tidy paragraphs. So when examining this issue, I think it's very important to define the difference between can't and won't. There's people that face legitimate challenges when approaching a TTRPG, And there's people who might not want to put in the work that is necessary to play the game successfully. And to some of the commenters' points, I do think that there are people who are drawn to the idea of Dungeons and Dragons, maybe because of how it's been portrayed in the media or because of what they've heard from friends who play the game, but who might be better served by either playing a board game that has more simplified rules or by doing something like improvised acting. Maybe they really like the idea of collaborative storytelling or the idea of acting out different scenarios. But when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, there's a real paper and pencil aspect to it that needs to be taken into account as well. Dungeons and Dragons definitely rewards you for putting in a little bit of work. And if that's genuinely not accessible to you, or if there aren't any reasonable accommodations that can be made, then perhaps a different system would serve you better. And I will say, if a game like Dungeons and Dragons is too demanding for you, that's not a moral failing. That doesn't make you a bad or a lazy person, in my perspective. I think that maybe this particular subsection of the tabletop hobby might not be the right one for you, and that doing something maybe like collaborative writing with your friends might scratch the itch better. A few things from those comments that I thought were actually useful insights. The first was that you should set the expectation out loud with your players. You want them to read their class abilities. You want them to know what their weapons do. Doing this before and at session 0 is a lot easier than doing it at session 8. I think a lot of these DMs might have benefited from just teaching it once and then holding the line. If a player asks repeatedly about the same rule, perhaps just redirecting them to what you've already taught them, or inviting them after the session and saying, hey, it's okay that you asked me these things, but it's kind of frustrating when I'm trying to run a lot of other things and you don't know how to work your own character. Would you be willing next session to come in better prepared? I think that a lot of DMs that get frustrated by this need to make sure that they're separating can't and won't. If you have a player who's meeting real barriers, see if you don't have different accommodations that can be made to make the game better for them. So, are people too lazy for Dungeons and Dragons? I actually don't think that that's an effective question to be asking. I think the real one you should ask is, are you able and willing to meet the hobby halfway? If you find it challenging, but you're still putting forth your best efforts to learn the system, then you're more than welcome. But if you're not, that's no judgment on you. It just means that maybe this isn't the right hobby for you. So let me know in the comments what your thoughts are about this. As always, everyone, this is Nat Nunn. My name is Napoleon, and I'll see you at the next session.